Yeah, go ahead.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Voice of Men 360 is here to celebrate Father's Day with a dynamic of celebration that might be about fathers who are presently here or grandfathers or great grandfathers. Today, we're here to celebrate. The idea was to celebrate them while they're still here. Yet, as we have right now, called the summer solstice, the longest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm inviting our friends and our participants today to celebrate the ancestors, to perhaps go tonight, look at that big, beautiful moon, and send a blessing to a father that still might be here, a grandfather that might be watching you, or all of your ancestors that are celebrating the 2021 edition of the Family Legacy, which is you. And so today, let's celebrate, yet also let's explore, let's ask questions, and let's have an engaging session to learn and develop a greater compassion and a communication that might be a little bit different than the way we started the day. With that, who are we going to bring in as our first guest, Sivam? I'm curious to see who we've got today to come and join us on the stage. There we go. Wow, the wonders of technology. And this is something that for our guest today, it might be nothing new for Miss Sutherland. She's used to zooming in and meeting people from all around the world. Ajay in Tobago might be used to doing Zoom. Yet guess what, folks? When I was your age, we weren't able to do this. We used to talk on a phone, a dial-up phone, and we'd imagine the person's face. Today, I'm not sure if you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe you'd rather put video off when you're seeing this old grizzly guy. Yet, we're happy to have you here today. And let's start off, ladies first, in Father's Day celebration. Miss Sutherland, I'm going to try your first name again. Khala?
Yes, that is correct.
And say a little bit about yourself. Welcome to Voice of Men 360s. Share a little bit about where you're at and perhaps a happy message about fathers.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for having me. Thank you to Sivam for inviting me to be on this show today. And thank you, Voice of Men 360, and everyone that's watching. I just want to say happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there and all of the men who are making a difference in every child's life. And I also want to just wish a happy Father's Day to my stepfather, who has just been in my life since I was 1 year old. And he's been here ever since, taking care of me and just, pouring into my life. So I appreciate him. And I just want to say happy Father's Day to him. So as Dave said, my name is Khala Sutherland, and I'm 23 years old, and I come from Jamaica, but I currently live in Canada, and I just finished school last year, and I'm going back to school for child and youth work, as I do love working with children, and I want to help people. And so I feel like the best place to start is with the young ones, and then then I can help make a difference in the world by working with the young ones first. So I just want to thank you guys for having me today.
It's absolutely great to have you here, and thank you so much. And again, throughout today's session, I'm going to invite you also to perhaps ask a question. It could be a question to me, it could be a question to Sivam, it could be a question to our listeners today. And it allows you to, whatever might be bubbling up about father relationships or sibling relationships or even birth parent relationships. It's something that's really quite fascinating to explore and to celebrate perhaps a new perspective. And let's go next to Ajay in Tobago. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fine. It's actually Ajay, but I would accept AJ. I would answer it. It's not a problem. I am 24 years of age recently. I reside on the island of Tobago in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm a former two-time National Youth Parliamentarian, and I also work along with the Be Male Examples Now organization in Tobago. I would like to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers of the world, all of the men stepping in there and filling the gap where the biological father may not be. I would like to also say a special Happy Father's Day to my father, Ian Alleyne, out in Winterthur, Switzerland.
Well, that's fantastic. And when you talk about Be Men, can you share a little bit more about what would be one or two things that you're really excited about when you're sharing the message of Be Men in Tobago and around the world?
Well, one of the main purpose of the organization is to create more male examples, more better male examples, starting here on the island of Tobago. So we see where we would participate in usually issues against domestic violence marches and so on. So we'd go there and we look for good male examples and create that balance in between, because we often tend to find where they highlight the negativity towards male or young men. So we always try to look for proper male examples and put them out there.
And I guess what would be a characteristic or quality that you see as really important for men to become even better men, better fathers? Would there be one or two things that you would like to see more men be able to improve on?
I think one is listening. Even as a young man myself, we often find ourselves, because we so accustomed to adopting this leadership role, that we don't listen, I don't want to say enough, but critically enough. So once we begin to listen more, we'll understand how our children feel or how the persons around us feel, and we're able to make a lot better decisions. And then we understand circumstances a lot better going forward.
And how about Ms. Sutherland? Do you have a thought or a feeling about suggestions on way that men can perhaps enhance their fatherhood, or perhaps it's even a characteristic or quality that you've noticed about your stepfather that has really uplifted you?
I think one of the most important things that a father can do is, because especially if you have multiple children, each of them will be different and they'll all have their different characteristics that make them up and that make them special. So as a father, one of the best things that you can do is really have a great example in yourself and the things that you do, because I find that, you might say something to your child that every day when you get up, you should do A, B, C, D. But then if you yourself as a father aren't doing those things, the child is now looking at your actions more than listening to your words. And then they end up following in those footsteps. So I think it's important for fathers to remember that, your children are looking at you always, looking at what you're doing. And, like, we're all human, so we'll make mistakes, but to really make sure that you're being intentional about the actions that you're partaking in, because the little things that you do, like, you don't realize, but your child ends up following exactly in those footsteps, even if you didn't want them to. So just being intentional about the actions, as well as the words, and then also, treating each child as their own person and not kind of grouping them together, because sometimes you have one child that's like the star of the family and then one that you're like, oh, I don't really know about this one. You're not really doing too much, but just finding like a good thing about each of them and trying to encourage that to come out of them. Yeah, I would say those are the two best things that a father can do. Just trying to empower their children in whatever little things that they're good at, and also being a good example in the way that you live.
I think that's a really great advice. And the funny thing is Khala, is your words and your understanding and your depth of understanding, it might even go over the heads of many men. And so when you're talking about intentionality, I've noticed that many men in their 50s or 60s, that word, they don't get it. So there's that disconnect. So I guess I'm curious on this beautiful thing, because both you guys are around 23, 24. When you're talking about really communicating with the different generations, and I know Khala mentioned she wants to help young ones because they probably understand easier. When you're talking about like the 40-year-olds and then the 60-year-olds, Ajay, perhaps share one or two of your ways to be so more patient, or maybe a little bit more understanding with people who might also be speaking almost a different language, because in many ways they were grown up in a totally different education system, a totally different communication system. What would be some tips for you on that one?
Well, actually, that question falls right into my garden because a few years ago, I had the ability to celebrate International Men's Day with some of the older guys at our church in Trinidad. So I brought the guys together. And one of the interesting things in the discussion was those guys who were so ready and willing to hear what we had us to say and our experience and the way we did and the way we interact with our mothers. And they were able to give us a lot of tips. Some of those guys were even a little more mischievous than we were. And once we sat and we listened with them, there were areas that we could have agreed on, and there were areas that were a little bit contentious. But that the fact that we were open to the discussion and we were interacting and not in a strict format, not in a jacket and tie kind of environment, very casual, having snacks, and we learned so much from that interaction. So I believe once the right environment is created and us, the younger generation, are willing to at least just listen and be a little more accommodating and share some funny stuff, share some jokes, or ask these guys for their experiences, and they're ready and willing to share.
That's absolutely, it's one of the things that I'm really curious here about, because when I was on the International Men's Day also, I found about 80 to 90% of the presenters were talking about the past and why we're in this situation, where there was very few people that were actually looking at changing the narrative, creating the news story, being part of the change. And I guess, Ms. Sutherland, what are some of the things that we can do to, again, celebrate fatherhood in a new narrative as opposed to perhaps an old narrative?
I would say one of the things that we don't do the best with fathers is we don't talk enough about what they're doing now. It's kind of a lot of the same things, like absentee fathers, you weren't there, and you've never cared about your children. Like it's all negative. And I think that yes, you do want to call out the ones that are not doing what they should be doing, but at the same time recognizing that that person can change. And sometimes when you become a father, you didn't have the proper blueprint to be able to pour into your children properly. And so, just being a little bit understanding of where they came from, and not giving them a pass, but being understanding that maybe they didn't really know what they were doing when they first became a father to you, but being forgiving and also being willing to let them do better as time goes on. So I think that yes, you want to talk about what hasn't been done properly, but you also want to give room for change, to say that, maybe they didn't do it properly at first, but there's still time. If they're still here, there's still time for them to do better as a father.
I think the tone that you have right now and the rhythm that you have right now is a really great example for folks to see. If you have a conversation with somebody with this tone, you probably are creating a safe space for them to be open. Yet quite often when we're having conversations with kids and parents, it's so energetically charged with frustration, with immediacy, with anger. And so then people start screaming and yelling and everything's charged. There's no opportunity to actually make progress because we're on such charged emotions. And I guess, Ajay, would you maybe share a story that you've noticed in Trinidad where you get two people together and they get so charged, but maybe you're able to interrupt them and bring them into more of a peaceful stance of communication and curiosity to allow communication to flow?
Yeah, I think you will get that here because with our culture or being Caribbean people, we generally like what we will call hype or vibes or energy. But I think sometimes you have to allow it to be ventilated initially or allow that energy to be released. And then sometimes you tend to come to a more lenient place where you begin to think a lot more and be a lot more calm in the process. Because I myself, I didn't have the perfect opportunity with my father because he migrated when I was pretty young. So growing up, I always had that level of animosity and a level of anger towards him initially. But what had happened was I always had a mother that believed in giving men their space. So I grew up with my uncles and guys from around the church and so on who usually advised me. And after I have ventilated that level of frustration, I was able to call him and speak to him and tell him exactly how I felt without being aggressive towards him, without wanting to bite off his head at that point in time. And we was able to have a discussion till now. Today I have a very good relationship with him. He would call me, we discuss different issues. It's so good where that particular issues my mother would not discuss with me. She would literally tell me, you have to call him and sort that out. From a male perspective, I'm not going to give you my view. So it's good happening. We are getting there. There are several organizations in Trinidad and Tobago who are making an effort in that area, because we have the Fathers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, which is led by Mr. Rondell Fields, and they are doing excellent work in beginning to create that middle ground and that room for mediation.
That is so inspiring to hear that, as because again, so many young men who may have had a father who went abroad to work or started anew, and there's an abandonment trauma that gets triggered. And that trauma can stay along with somebody, and it can be acted out through frustration, through anger, through violence, through addiction. And what you've just said is a beautiful bridge, that there was a safe space that was created where you were allowed to be angry, yet you also wanted to resolve some of that anger. You wanted to be able to feel like confirmed that your anger is not wrong. And the fact that the anger is actually, if you become a student, and this is one of the areas I think Ms. Sutherland is going to really look into with her childhood education. Whereas when children act out, they're not evil, they're not terrible beings. That's the way that they've learned to act out. That's the behaviors they've learned. And sometimes they get good response from having a tantrum. Yet you can also slow them down and have a conversation so they're not left with a trauma of abandonment, so that they can look for ways to perhaps express themselves differently. I'm wondering about creativity. What are some of the ways that Khala has explored creativity? I have a feeling you have got some creativity in you, whether it's music or it's drawing or painting. What type of creativity have you done? And is that something that you've shared with your stepfather?
My stepfather really loves music, and he's like on the side, he's also like a DJ. So, for me personally, like I also really love music, and he's not Jamaican, but you would swear that he's Jamaican, and that makes the connection so much easier because, we have that in common. Like he loves Jamaican people, he loves Jamaican culture, and then I'm Jamaican and he loves music and we love music. So, we listen to music together and we talk about different artists that we like. And so, we're able to connect in that way. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest creative way, I guess.
That's beautiful. And that's actually from you were asking a little earlier or commenting on parenting, that men don't have a playbook. And it's true. As a parent, there isn't a playbook. And it's not like a one size fits all in parenting, because the kids are so different. And so if someone was listening today and they want to take away a point of a parent that might be frustrated with their kids right now, is go find what they're interested in.
Right.
Because so many parents right now, and I seriously witness it a lot, is that they're so down on their kids about playing video games. Like, stop playing games, stop, as opposed to being curious about what games they play, or actually even maybe going and learning a little bit of the game they play, or go watch some YouTube with them, because they're not going to be watching TV like my generation. We used to sit around and watch TV together. Today, kids watch 90% of the things on YouTube. Yet as a parent, how about go and ask the kids to teach them what's the coolest thing you're watching on YouTube? And so parents, if you're out there, this is a little tip. Go meet the kids where they're at. Go find some common ground. It might take you to let go of what you think is right. But guess what? There's so much in the world right now that's so different than what you and I experienced a few decades ago. How about Ajay? What creativity have you been tapping into to express yourself and connecting with fathers and men and boys? What ways are you doing it in a creative way?
Well, I used to be a part of a theater company in Tobago. Well, we are now a little bit slow. And usually we use different forms of dramatization to, well, acting and theater through education, and that means, so usually that was one of my comfort areas initially, because when you, how we create, is you don't just create a character, you have history behind it, you don't know why, when, how, and those. So when you begin to ask those questions about a character, sometimes you tend to find yourself getting in between. And when you find yourself in this crossroad, you tend to realize, but I'm overdoing it. Or in some cases, I could pull back here, so it creates that level of adjustment. And then sometimes when I get on stage and you feel free, the lights are on you, the whole audience looks at you. It's a whole different environment. Feel like you are in control at that point in time. So that really works. But I would also say, in my case, my father is a motorcycle mechanic, and I've always had a need for speed. So one of the areas we usually bond is about working on motorcycles, or we look at the latest one that comes out, or he may share his experience revving the RPMs right up to the limit and that feeling of flying, and then he might warn me of taking some of those risks. Even though sometimes he may say, I don't want you guys to take this, that's why I'm explaining it. And sometimes we're still tempted to push it, but once he's around, he will be able to explain and show you how to manage that level of risk.
That's beautiful. Khala noticed immediately when you talked about the speed, your whole energy went up. It was like you were there, you were flying on a bike, and that's the type of thing that many people, either they can tap into when they think of their father or the experiences of their father, or it's pretty much all a negative. And so my question is about shifting negativity into positivity. What's been one of your secret strategies to do that? And I'll ask Ajay on that one too, is that because you've been working with boys that they might be still traumatized or playing a record, their dad said something bad to them, or they lost, or they feel that they're a loser. What has been one or two of your ways to assist them to transform that negative experience into something positive?
Yeah, it's interesting that you took that direction, because for me, that is why I am here, or I'm a part of this session, because I would have seen from my experience that I've encountered other young men with similar feelings, similar energies, and it's hurtful and painful to see some of the experiences. So I would have been a part of a boys' polishing camp for 3 years consistently. And these younger guys, a lot younger than myself at that point in time, 13, 14, 7, would share some of the similar experiences. And then you would see the level of frustration on these guys. Sometimes their mothers or the female counterparts just can't understand them. No matter how much they explain, how much they cry, just not being understood. And when we came to that session and we interacted as young men, they would share and they become open. And that is why I saw the need. One of the number one ways that I realize is effective is through sport. That ability to play football in the rain, to get sweaty. Sometimes you are fighting, even though you could get out of control if not properly arranged. But that level of competitiveness helps. So that's one of the secrets for me of getting it out. I want to share another energy. You sit down and you would talk. You don't have the energy to argue or to get loud, because you already expounded that energy in a sporting arena. To be able to share and be reasonable. Sometimes, as I said earlier, sometimes all these guys want is a listening ear. All they want is somebody understand, somebody's willing to hear. And then it's easier now to make suggestions, because sometimes they come up with their own solution to these problems. Sometimes a 7-year-old would be able to give myself a very good suggestion to deal with an issue. So that's one of the ways that usually works for me.
That's a fantastic example, folks. And again, Ajay, I really compliment you in managing the energy. And so I have a feeling if you're playing with some Rambo soccer players, you can gear it up there and go fast, yet you can also bring them down, and they might have been getting a red card or a yellow card, and they're going to lose it, but we want them to stay in the game. So we've got to figure out a way to talk to them when they're at that heightened state, bring them down so that they can then get back up there. That's a resilience training type of exercise. And I have a feeling, Khala, with some of the work that you're going to be doing with kids, have you had some experiences where you've really had to work with somebody who might be going hysterical, and then you bring them into more of a rhythm that you have right now?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with children like at summer camps and even within like school systems. And I find, a lot of times, like we did talk about it earlier with emotions, that sometimes, like anger is looked at as a negative emotion, which it can be used as a negative emotion, but sometimes when you try to dial back and find out what's behind that anger, you find out that, there's hurt behind it or there's sadness. And so if you try to find a way to like to curve that and to say that, your anger is it's necessary. Like I understand why you're feeling this way, but let's talk about what's actually behind that. And the thing with children is, the first instinct is to show that burst of emotion. But if you sit down with them, if I find if you take them into a separate situation, like if you take them out of the environment that caused that anger or that caused that initial emotion, then you can find out what's actually behind that, what's the secondary emotion that we usually don't see, but that's what's fueling the primary emotion. So with children, one of the big things is to figure out what works for each child, because sometimes taking them away from, the other children can make them feel singled out. So you have to find what works for them. Sometimes sitting them down and making them do an activity that's more quiet or that's more hands-on. So it's different for each child. But I think the first thing is to recognize that their emotion is valid, first and foremost, and then find out what's the driving force behind that burst of emotion that you're seeing.
It sounds like something that should be really taught in school. It's partly, I guess, supposed to happen in the home.
Right.
What would be some ways to get that into schools, or from your experience, is it taught in schools? Because it sounds like emotional intelligence combined with, in a funny way, because I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, because financial literacy is not taught in school,
No.
emotional literacy is not taught in school. Like, these are the most important things that people are going to learn, because if you can't take care or deal with money, if you can't take care and deal with your emotions, you're not really learning very much, because you're shutting yourself down to two of the most important things in the world. So as a future educator, Miss Sutherland, what are some ways that we can maybe plant some seeds today that if someone's watching, they might say, whoa, let's contact that girl in Pickering and see if she can pilot project something for emotional intelligence for youth or kids?
I think the first thing that the schools have to keep in mind is the children are at school for majority of their day. They're not spending majority of their time at home. Like a lot of teachers say, well, my job is to teach you math and English and science and those things. And the job of your parents is to teach you your life skills. Like everything else, like I'm not supposed to teach you that, which is understandable. You're not their parent, but they spend a lot of their time at school and with other children. And so I think it's important to change the model of the way that schooling is formatted now, where it's, a lot of sitting and looking at the board and listening to the teacher. And I think they should try to integrate kind of like small groups within the classroom, opportunities where you can like break out into a group, have, small activities and do things where, you're talking more and you're kind of expressing how you're feeling. Because a lot of the times it's just, the teacher's talking and everyone else is listening. And sometimes you also, you need to say something and you need to be heard. And there's just no room for that. And so, like, yes, gym is important, science is important, but also making room for children to be able to kind of hone those skills of how can I express myself while I'm at school, because sometimes you go home and there's just no time for that. Your parents have worked all day, they have to cook, you have homework to do. So by the time you get home, you don't really have time to sit and talk with your family. So integrating something where there's small groups, you know, just even if it's like 15 minutes a day where you have a designated time where, just like you have a gym teacher, you have like an emotional health teacher or something like that. where you can sit and talk about your emotions and what you're feeling. And yeah.
Well, I think that's a great response, and I'm going to invite you and maybe even have a chat with your stepfather about that, because I heard you say life skills. I heard you say like these real important emotional mastery. There's curiosity 101. These are really important things to assist and equip young people with. I remember during doing one of my advanced degrees, it's like we had 15 minutes a week in public speaking. Yet, if you looked at all the amount of time that was spent on finance and economics and accounting, probably the most important course there was that 15 minutes in public speaking.
Right.
And it's something that is just misguided right now. And I guess I'm going to hear if Ajay has something that's going on in Trinidad and Tobago. It sounds like it's a life skills 101 that ought to be put at the top of the importance list, because we're seeing mental illness and we're seeing mental disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, addiction, anxiety soaring off the maps because people aren't being taught this. So AJ, what would you want to do if you had a magic wand? Or maybe you're doing it right now with the boys in Tobago. So what would be some of the things that you would do?
Well, our system is a little bit different based off what Khala was saying in Canada. So there was a program called moral education, which is usually taught with first to third form. So those are your first 3 years at secondary school locally. That program was an attempt to bridge that gap. However, the last I would have checked, that program is having financial issues where the funding for the lecturers and so on were becoming problematic. And that kind of created a program to dwindle a bit till I'm not sure what's the current position. But that program would usually have to do financial management, emotions, the difference between yes and no, as well as our education system is one where they try to integrate a lot of those measures. However, we have a shortage of male teachers. So as male students, we tend to be a little bit more mischievous, and we tend to choke a lot of mischief at our lecturers and some of our teachers. And with them being female, they don't see it as us just being who we are, expressing ourselves, but we tend to be seen as troublemakers and mischief makers and problematic persons. So as a result of that, it created a kind of backlog on the system. However, those classes where we had a lot of male teachers, you would see a completely different result. You would see a completely different perspective taken by the students in general, both male and female. Particularly our mechanical engineering class. Usually we have no lower than a grade 2 coming out of that class, because you don't go to class every day and sit down with a book. That the days you go to class, you would analyze a vehicle. We literally bought a scrap car and scrapped the vehicle right down, and we built it. And in the rebuilding process, then we begin to learn about math. So we implemented what we would have learned in math, and what we would have learned in physics also came back in. And then we learn about occupational health and safety in the process. And then we had to learn money management as well. We had to purchase the vehicle, and we had to manage to get parts to repair it. So I think what Khala had suggested is a very good initiative. Once we get the sufficient funding to back it, and we have lecturers, both male and female, who are trained to deal with those circumstances. So we're not just getting the long formulas that we have to learn, but you know when to apply it, how to apply it, why it is necessary. And I think students will achieve it a lot better. We know how to apply it better in life, and will become better humans and better citizens.
Experiential learning. Both you and Khala have mentioned that is the way that people are demanding. It's like that's why our kids, like, they love playing video games, because they get instantaneous gratification, they get feedback, they get little prizes, they're encouraged to be better. And our education system needs to infuse a little bit of that dynamic of experiential learning, make it fun, make it engaging. What you just talked about, taking down a car, ripping it down, building it up, that's practical experience. And it's funny, my smile in the last few days when I've been thinking about the lack of financial literacy in Canada has been, it's like we really do need to go back to home economics. is understanding the economics, the money, the cash flow, the using credit cards, the practical experiences that when we learned how to make eggs and toast and these things that are really useful, as opposed to some of the topics right now that I was talking to a teacher yesterday that feels a lot of it is these days babysitting. And the school system has become more of a babysitting service as opposed to an uplifting service. So I wanted to do a little bit of a U-turn now and bring on the founder of Voice of Men 360, Mr. Sivam. And I have a fun little question. And both of you are also asked to maybe think of a question that we might ask him a few questions. But my first one was going to be, Sivam, the difference between Father's Day in Sri Lanka versus the difference between Father's Day in Canada. How has it been a different experience for you? And are there some differences in the way it is celebrated?
I would say even last couple of years, before last couple of years, I never come across with Mother's Day or Father's Day or anything, even back home. But nowadays it's getting used to it. But whenever we think of all those celebrations days, we always think about the business side of it. The commercial aspect of it, because it's almost everything nowadays is commercialized, and whenever it's kind of like scared, or it's kind of like frightened that whenever that days comes in and then approaching, and then we want to take our fathers or buying gift, or what's kind of a host we going to have it this celebration or this holidays, things like that. And when we talk about all these celebration days, it's not really one day over and over again. I heard many times in many culture, it's not one day. Maybe for a reason they put it, they come up with one day, but it's not just a one day, Mother's Day or Father's Day, because they have been contributing so many years, since their birth. So how can you celebrate just one day? And are we appreciating them enough? Or are we talking about, are we having an open conversation? Things like that. So it's nowadays, I would say in India, in any part of the world, especially Asian countries, so still they do have big values and things like that. Even if it's a culture-wise or family-wise, but on the other hand, the younger generation, we are actually thinking about more on the hosting side. Why should we want to celebrate? We always have a family bonding. As we move to Western world, it's kind of like the gap is getting bigger and bigger. But when we go back to those days, it's always there's a bonding. Any celebration you take, it's the full day or a couple of weeks, and we get a lot of we meet a lot of relatives, and we go to a temple and things like that. But here now, there's nobody really spending time together. Maybe just one day you just go to park or take to a restaurant. That's about the culture is so much shifted. I would say in any ethnic group, though. Don't get me wrong, but that's the way I feel it. Yeah.
Thank you. Would Khala or Ajay have a question for Sivam or a Voice of Ben 360, or any of the things that might be curious from your perspective?
I have a question. So you mentioned that, like, in the recent years, it's become something where now it's more celebrated, like Father's Day and Mother's Day, and it's also become a lot more commercialized. So, like, what how was it celebrated before? Was it kind of like just day to day you would do things for your father and mother, or like how was it before it was actually celebrated on that specific day? Like what did you guys do for your father and mother, or is it kind of just like any other day, like you just treat it like any other day?
So there are a couple of ways. Thank you for the question, Khala. And there are a couple of ways. One is, let's say, if father's birthday or mother's birthday or any of our birthday, we never had a Father's Day. Whenever we have birthdays or celebrations, we normally go to a temple and then have a special puja. That's one, with the family, used to it. But I lost my father when I was 1.5 years old, so I didn't have that. But my uncle, they came to my life, my father's brother and also my mother's brothers. So we go to temple, and that's the way we celebrate uh, traditionally. On the other hand, what we do is like whoever passed away on the day of remembrance, we do it twice a year. One is normally in a month, let's say in November, and also whoever passed away the exactly day or they born. That's the way we have a special fasting, and then we do have a special ceremonies, things like that. Of course, it's still spending a lot of money on that too. We make a lot of food items and things like that, and then we pray, uh, things like that. But right nowadays, after I moved to Canada, I never had a chance, or sometimes when we go through the tradition and cultures, you have so much questions whether it makes sense in terms of spending so much money, or are you wasting money? Appreciating or uh, doing things differently, that's a different thing. But the thing is, are we really wasting money? Because end of the day, those foods, no, most of the foods are wasted. Most of the monies are, you have to, at least you have some kind of budget. So if you give it to somebody, let's say food bank or any other orphans or any other community organization, at least 10, 20 people, or even the one day 100 people or 200 kids can have their meal. So is it really worth it? You know what I mean? So everything is shifted. So I have my own internal conflict that whether I should be more focused on that, celebrating Father's Day. So everybody has their own way of doing things, but still people do that in my community, in our culture. They do it big time. I don't mean I don't against them, but things that when you grow up, you ask more questions, so you get to know more. So you had to see whether it makes sense, or how this contributing in terms of empowering or helping other people. Though, yeah.
Thank you, Sivam. I'm going to flip it a little bit over to Ajay and saying, so what are one or two ways that you're celebrating Father's Day this year?
Okay, well, for me, usually I don't really to say celebrate Father's Day in a big way because my father generally does not live where I am. So I've never celebrated a Father's Day with him physically being here. So usually I would give him a call and we chat for the day, which doesn't sound like anything new for us because we are accustomed speaking for hours. But I know usually the church is something very big in our culture. So for Father's Day, we generally tend to always find fathers at churches with their children. Usually they'll be appreciated. They will share different experiences among themselves as fathers. They will share the biblical perspective on it. Because a lot of our population are religious. So usually here it's more religious. It's not as commercialized as Mother's Day as is expected. So usually we still get a tie or get a box of food, or children will cook for you, and that's how it is locally. But for me, it's usual. And then COVID-19 here is beginning we trying to curb it as much as possible because we are seeing spikes in our country. So we are currently on a lockdown. So you can physically go to be with your parents, in some persons' cases, or with your fathers. So most of it is being done via technology as usual.
Thank you very much. And Khala, in Pickering, what might be one or two things you're doing?
Usually what we do for my stepfather is we'll, make breakfast in the morning and we all sit down together and we eat breakfast. And then we give him his gifts because my stepfather, he likes gifts. So, with Father's Day, you always have to look at, what that person would like. And so he likes family time and also he likes, thoughtful gifts, not just you went out and you spent money and it's something that he doesn't need, but something thoughtful. And then later on, we'll cook dinner and then eat dinner together. So it's not, we don't do too much, but just things that are thoughtful and that he'll actually appreciate.
That's great. And again, one thing I'm going to invite our listeners, and actually for Ajay and Khala and Sivam too, is there's a book called Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. And if you haven't read it, I'm going to invite you to go online. It's a little test. It takes about 15 minutes. And it teaches you your love language and that each of us has one or two different ways that we express love. Now, the challenge in relationships is that we're expressing our love in one way, but maybe that person, that's not their love language. And there happens to be 5 major love languages. One might be gifts. One might be quality time. One might be words of appreciation. One might be acts of service. One might be touch. And so if you figure out other people's love language, you might be able to fill up their love tank more readily. And so that might be another game that some of you can play, perhaps with your father today. Get them to do the love language. In our household, it's quite funny because my son, ever since he was a little boy, we've encouraged him to cook, and he's loved cooking. And he's gone around the world taking cooking classes everywhere, and it's been great. So every year when we're together, he'll often make me a meal, which is very nice. Now, when we came back to Canada, because he was born in Singapore, my dad found it a little weird because my dad's request every year since we've been back, which is 3 years, and he goes, I just want a hot dog. And so we never heard that in the last couple of years. Yet today I asked him again, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? He goes, I want a hot dog. And so we just got it like 2 hours ago. We got all these hot dogs together and my dad made a hot dog and he was the happiest father. And I said, because my son's going to make dinner in about 3 hours, which will be a really lovely gourmet dinner. Yet my dad's happy because he had his hot dog. So sometimes, folks, listen to the people, ask them what they want, be prepared that 90% of people, when you ask them what they want, let me ask you guys, do you know what the answer is? Khala,
They will not know?
I don't know. When you ask people questions, just notice it in the next couple of weeks. When you ask somebody a question, just notice that people will say, I don't know, I don't know. The school system has brainwashed people to say, I don't know. And so that's what takes maybe 2 or 3 or 4 learning cycles to get them to feel enough comfort, perhaps confidence, perhaps self-esteem. Because to really say what you want, you have to step into vulnerability. Because sometimes when you tell people what you want, you become vulnerable that they might laugh at you or they might shame you. And so that's part of the dynamic here. And I just wanted to really add that fathers can be shamed also. In fact, that's happened to a lot of men, that they don't know what to do to talk to their kids. They don't know how to connect. I see many grandfathers and great-grandfathers very disconnected because the world is so different. I'm inviting anyone who does still have a grandfather around, give them a call, yet you can also just send them a prayer. And that's why I love today being summer solstice, a new beginning, is that tonight, Ajay, you're making me smile because I can see your father in Switzerland. Tonight, go look at the moon and send a little blessing to him through the moon. And that's another way. That's how our ancestors, that's how our ancients used to communicate. And while we think that we're closer this way, our ancients used to do that and people around the world could actually feel the blessing from Sri Lanka to Canada, from Canada to Jamaica, from Tobago to Switzerland. And so you can use the technology of prayer, you can use the technology of care and compassion, and that might be another wrinkle that we invite people today to celebrate. The fathers of today, the fathers of yesteryear, the ancestors who went into us being where we are today, which I have a feeling we're in a very blessed place. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ajay to sort of say one last little compliment or invitation to people in celebration of Father's Day. And I'm thanking you very much for adding your wisdom at your age, at the compassion and the contribution that you're expressing to boys and men in Tobago and around the world.
Well, I would like to once again say thanks to our Voice for Men 360 for having this critical conversation at this point in time. Because what we see now is a lot of persons, some persons trapped home with their fathers on a day like today and just don't know how to express it, just don't know how to have a hug. Because sometimes as men, we're so prideful and our egos are so big that it is a problem just to say sorry to our children. It's sorry to say I love you to our very own children. So even in closing, I would just like to encourage fathers or children, just hug your children. Simply, if you can't say I love you, just simply give a hug in this circumstance. Just simply say I support you, or I am proud of you, or I feel happy when you achieve something good. Even if you don't know what to say, just some word of encouragement could be both for children to their fathers and from fathers back to their children.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And over to Khala.
Just to piggyback off of what Ajay said, I think that it's also important to recognize that it's not too late, that if you have messed up in the past, or you don't have a great relationship with your father, or fathers, if you don't have great relationships with your children, it's not to say that because things didn't go well in the past, it's not possible to have a fruitful future. Because if you're both still here, then there's still an opportunity to fix that relationship and to even create a better relationship. So just to remember that mistakes were made in the past, but if you can both own up to those mistakes and have a conversation about it and move forward, then it's possible to have a great relationship. And also, I think conversations like these are very important to have, because sometimes people just don't have the language. They know how they feel in their hearts, or they know what thoughts they're thinking, but they're just not sure how to start the conversation or even what words to say. So just having a platform like this is very important, and I'm thankful that we're here right now to have this conversation and that this platform exists. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for those wise words. And as you were speaking, it was beautiful that I was hearing you can create and change the narrative. So you might think you're a bad father today, yet tomorrow you could become a good father, a great father, a fantastic father. A child, you can be a naughty child and you can become a wonderful child. You can become an inspiring child. So thank you for shifting the narrative there, Miss Sutherland, the wonderful childcare facilitator in process. And let's go to Sivam. I understand you've got a couple of acknowledgements of some fathers around the globe. Would you like to turn back on your mic and share a little bit of congratulatory kindness and cheer? You're on mute there still.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Still, we are getting a couple of comments. So, again, happy and appreciate all of your inputs and sharings, Ajay and Khala, and Dave too. However, still we have a lot of elements that we have to discuss. Those who are going through struggles, single fathers, and those who have not or who are not able to have their child at this time, So these are the things that we had to look into that. And also, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, not only fathers, but also mothers, brothers, uncles, and friends, sisters, teachers, leaders, and everyone who have contributed towards father's role in someone's life. And we have about, this is our first initiative that we come across. We wanted to bring, we wanted to acknowledge, honor people from different community, different ethnic groups. And we have about 4 people. I will read it to you. And then this information will be posted on our social media. First one is actually, his name is Ajit Kuwade. First South Asian to contest for public office 1984, indicated Hindi drivers written test in Ontario, also driver's handbook, reported on traffic problems in Scarborough, adopted by Council 1979, leading first ethnic organization Marathi Bashik Mandal to participate in Canada Day Parade president. Blood donation since 1970, 75 donations so far. Executive member, Hindu Society fundraising to aid disaster in India since 1990. Member on CPDA to improve in driving testing. One of the only driver trainers for disabled person. Organizing public events in Canadian society. Outstanding Canadian person awarded by the government of Canada. Second one is Cecil Lambert, was born in the parish Manchester, Jamaica. While growing up, he had a rough childhood, but he's giving God thanks during those years. He had kept him safe from one stage of his life to another. Despite everything he had been through, it didn't prevent him from being a responsible citizen. After becoming a father, he was able to grow his children and give them what he didn't have. The third person is Carson Ireland. Carson Ireland was a member of Army Navy Air Force Branch 345, Lambeth, a member of Iron Worker Local 700, Oneida Veterans Affairs and Oneida Fair Board. He was an active community member and a cherished father, grandfather, brother, uncle, cousin. And also another person, Khadirevasan Kandeya, he's from Tamil communities from Sri Lanka. He lost his wife a couple of years ago. He has a couple of kids and one of them is autism, and he always taking care of the family, and he's also volunteering at community organizations. So congratulations all the participant who actually agreed and they shared their information with us, and we are acknowledging and honoring them as on this Father's Day. Thank you again. And also I have a few announcements quickly. Today we will have our monthly men's group meeting at 7 o'clock, and we do have weekly shows, 4 live shows open up. Live talk show is on every Sunday at 10 a.m. It's in English. And Willy Tamil live talk show is on Sundays at 8 a.m. Monthly webinar first Saturday of every month from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And monthly special show, The Unspoken Tears, second Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The focus is on domestic violence against men, bullying, male sexual abuse and human trafficking, and a panel discussion once a month in English and Tamil. We bring people from different part of the world and share their perspectives, thoughts, life experiences on a particular topic. Podcast. All of our shows are available on 6 platforms, including iPhone, Google Play, and so on. Monthly Events Group, I already told you guys. And the Pass the Talking is Stick, Indigenous Peer-to-Peer Support Group. 4th Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. through Zoom. Next one will be on Friday, June 25th. There are no limitations with gender, age, nationality, or ethnic groups. All walks of life can participate in any of our shows. If you want to be guest on any of our shows or willing to be part of our organization, please help us directly or indirectly, reach out to us. And we love to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, and government officials and businesses. Anything you can name it. Phone number is to contact 437-889-8329. Email address is info@voiceofmen360.org, and website is www.voiceofmen360.org. And any social media, Facebook group, page, and Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube. Please subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you. And of course, we want to reach out to more people and continue your support. Thank you. Last, anything? Bye, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.